to one and all. I hope everyone is safe during this pandemic. Welcome to the international webinar of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College on Digital Humanities in association with Durham University, England, Edith, Cowan University, Australia, and Design Beku, Bengaluru, India. At the outset, I'm happy to inform you all that our Evening Degree College is celebrating its Golden Jubilee year. On behalf of our college, we congratulate all the stakeholders. I now request Sunil sir to play a small video of our college.
A great journey begins with a small step. Proving this statement true, it all began in 1930 when two women, educational enthusiasts, took up a noble initiative. In the erstwhile posh locality of Seshadripuram, Srimati Anandamma and Srimati Seethamma started a primary school with 20 children. Now, Seshadripuram Educational Trust under its umbrella has 36 institutions. It all began with the educational visionary Sri K.M. Nanjappa, the then President of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, in 1971, which has been a landmark in the history of education for the working students by starting Seshadripuram Evening College.
Our college started with the primary objective of imparting formal education to the quality and needy. The college is affiliated to the Bengaluru Central University. Being in the heart of the city, it has an easy reach and connectivity. Its premises comprise of spacious building with good canteen, computerized library, business lab, browsing center, Wi-Fi facility, sports club, thus well equipped for all academic, sports, co-curricular like NSS, NCC, YRC, etc. and extracurricular activities throughout the year. The college organizes orientation program for freshers and guest lecturers to equip them.
As most of us are working in the morning and studying in an evening degree college, it is very facilitative for us to excel in our jobs. Even though we are studying in an evening degree college, we are being provided many state level and national level opportunities to express our talents. Also, many cultural activities are being conducted.
SEDC is engaged in various cultural activities throughout the year. There are numerous committees in the college that perform variedly on their behalf and have a lasting effect on the college, students as well as outsiders.
Our evening degree college believes in the vision to ignite the minds of every student to identify and develop their inner strength, with the mission to promote holistic development of students by offering quality education and making them self-reliant and progressive.
Our college NCC cadets will visit every academic year in Officers Training Academy Chennai and INS Kadamba Naval Base at Karwar. It will motivate our college NCC cadets to join Indian Armed Forces.
I now request our beloved principal, Professor N.S. Satish sir, to welcome all the dignitaries to this international webinar. Over to you, sir.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. Happy evening to India and Australia and happy noon to England. I take this opportunity to welcome you all for this international webinar in association with Durham University, England, Edith, Cowan University, Australia, and Design Beku, Bengaluru, India. At the outset, I would like to thank all the office bearers of these three great institutions and welcome all of them. I would like to welcome Dr. Mayurakshi Chaudhuri, Assistant Professor of Sociology, Coordinator Digital Humanities, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Jodhpur, India, who is inaugurating this international webinar. Madam, on behalf of Seshadripuram Education Trust, I wholeheartedly welcome you for this international webinar. I would like to welcome today's keynote speaker, Professor Paul Arthur, Professor of Digital Humanities, Director of Center of Humanities Research, Edith Cowan University, Perth, Australia. On behalf of Seshadripuram Education Trust, I welcome you in absentia. I am happy to welcome today's first team speaker, Professor Claire Warwick, Professor of Digital Humanities, Department of English, Durham University, England. Madam, on behalf of Seshadripuram Education Trust, I welcome you for this international webinar. I would like to welcome second theme speaker, Dr. Padmini Ray Murray, founder, Design Beku, Bengaluru, India. Madam, on behalf of Seshadripuram Education Trust, I welcome you for this webinar. It is my proud privilege to welcome one more distinguished guest who is presiding this webinar, Dr. Nirmala Menon, Associate Professor of Literature, Digital Humanities and Publishing Studies Research Group, Indian Institute of Technology, Indore, India. Madam, on behalf of Seshadripuram Education Trust, I welcome you and I request you to preside over this international webinar. I welcome all the office bearers and trustees of Seshadripuram Education Trust and all the principals of our sister institution, other heads of the institution, conveners, volunteers, and all the participants who are registered across the globe. Now, I welcome Dharapa Konnur, Program Coordinator, and Sunil Kumar Ji, IQSC Coordinator. And finally, I welcome our own teaching and administrative faculties to this webinar. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, sir, for welcoming all. On behalf of all, I welcome our beloved principal, sir, to this international webinar. Welcome, sir. Now, I would like to introduce Dr. Mayurakshi Chaudhuri, Assistant Professor of Sociology, Coordinator, Digital Humanities, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Jodhpur, India, who is inaugurating this international webinar. Madam has done her MA in Regional Planning from University of Sheffield, UK, and has done her integrated MA and PhD degrees in Comparative Sociology and Global and Socio-Cultural Studies from Florida International University, USA. Her research areas include gender studies, migrations and mobilities, historical sociology, technology and society and digital cultures. Dr. Chaudhuri is the recipient of international and national fellowships, including a German Academic Exchange Service Fellowship and the Government of India National Merit Scholarship. Her research has been extensively published with the top-tier journals such as Sex Roles, Transfers, and Applied Mobilities. Her recent projects focus on emerging areas of technology and mobility, digital healthcare, and images in digital cultures. An interdisciplinary scholar with academic training in sociology, cultural anthropology, and geography, she enjoys advising undergraduate, postgraduate, and doctoral projects that are located at the intersections of society, culture, and technology. May I now request Dr. Mayurakshi Chaudhuri to render the inaugural address. Over to you, madam.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very kind of you to introduce me. This is, as you would agree, is a challenging task to deliver an inaugural address on digital humanities, precisely because the area of inquiry, as we know, has been around for only the past 10 to 15 years. And in India, it's only emerging. And it is needless to say that we are yet to arrive at a precise definition of digital humanities. And we are still also to arrive at a process of theoretical framework in this area of inquiry. Having said this, my talk today will be about a relatively underexplored area of digital humanities, where I'm going to talk about digital humanities pedagogy. So with due permission, if I may share my screen. So we'll start with the question that was raised in 2012 by Stephen Breyer in an edited work by Matthew Gold in the debates in the digital humanities, where Breyer writes, actually asks this question, where is the pedagogy? And this is in relation to digital humanities. And there he talks about the growth of digital humanities and how the focus of DH has been on scholarly research, has been on peer review, has been on publication. And the question of how we teach in the university, in the colleges, how we prepare the next generation of graduate students for careers inside and beyond the academia and DH is still quite underexplored. To contextualize, I quote from Breyer's work, where he talks about a quick research that he did with articles published in the Digital Humanities Quarterly. And I quote, Full text searches of the contents of 90 articles, 90 articles published to date in the DHQ reveal a less marked disparity between research and teaching and pedagogy. While the word research garners 81 hits in total, that is 9 of every 10 articles that DHQ has published, teaching and learning each total at least 40 hits and 26 when paired, while pedagogy appears a mere 9 times, averaging about 1 of every 10 articles. So since then, several publications have been made which talks about pedagogy in DH. But in the Indian context that we are talking about today, we'd still say that pedagogy in DH is in a very, very nascent state. So in this talk, for the rest of my talk, I'm going to talk about some of the contours of pedagogy in DH that has been operative in India. And we would also look at a new curriculum that has been designed at IIT Jodhpur on digital humanities. So before I go talking about these curriculums that have been present in India and that are coming up, let us take a look at this flow diagram where we talk about imagining a digital humanities in terms of its global trajectory. So pedagogically speaking, as I said, not much has been written in the Indian context about how we teach in the classroom about DH. And it is only very recently that the exercise of talking about pedagogy publicly in India has started. So when we talk about pedagogy, it is not just about how students learn. It is also about how educators construct the ideological. It is a sense of situatedness from where we speak, from where we as educators we speak. So if we take a reference from this flow diagram that you see on the screen, with the understanding of starting of DH, where text has been used as data, going on to looking at images, digitization, sound, object, number, multimedia, and the AI, AR, VR, the artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality ideas. So we see that the progression has been also entwined with the nature of research that has evolved in terms of DH. So when we come to talking about pedagogy in India, DH pedagogy in India, it is not really very helpful if we try to adopt a theoretical premise from elsewhere, because it is not just difficult, it is also futile, and this has been also voiced in articles by P.P. Sneha and other articles, precisely because designing a DH curriculum in India calls for a completely different design orientation. And one of the starting points is to look at how the understanding of digital, how the understanding of technology and the humanities are often understood in different and often in contradictory terms. And this has got to do with how disciplinary evolutions have taken place historically. But as Ashish Rajtaksh also points out, that it is more a conceptual or cultural problem rather than anything else. So let's, for the timing, assume that this has been an emerging area of inquiry, at least in India. And some of the introductory contours that we see has been pioneered by Jodhpur University through their very, very significant research project, Bijitra, from Presidency University, from Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata. From Srishti Institute of Art, Design, Technology, we have Dr. Ray Murray with us. She's been instrumental for Srishti's launching of the degree program in DH. Center for DH in Pune, and the initial efforts at archiving Indian Synod.ma and Pack.ma. Over time, in the last 4 or 5 years, we see that more and more universities, institutes, colleges have started to offer courses in DH. And it is only recently that we see that institutes of national importance like IIT Indore is exploring initiating a dual MS PhD program in DH, and IIT Jodhpur, where we have recently launched MSc and PhD programs in DH the last year. So before I go talking about the DH platform at IIT Jodhpur, let me quickly also show you this map that is taken from Professor Menon and her students' recent article, which talks about, which shows the spread of activities, DH-oriented activities across the country. And if you just focus on the second item in the legend, DH courses programs, you will see how it is not really omnipresent, how it is really, you can count the numbers, 3 or 4 areas that are actually looking at these courses and programs in DH. As you can see that there is a need to talk about pedagogy with relation to DH in the Indian context. So with that, let me introduce you to the Digital Humanities platform at IIT Jodhpur. This is an interdisciplinary platform for research and teaching that was launched early last year in 2019. And the hallmark of this interdisciplinary platform is that it is not really aligned with a single department. It runs parallel to all departments, and faculty members across departments, across disciplines can actually conjoin this platform and contribute to the furthering of DH at IIT Jodhpur. So the diagram that you see on the screen is how we conceptualize DH at IIT Jodhpur in the interdisciplinary platform. We draw inspiration from the flow diagram that you saw a couple slides back. However, as you can see, this is not a linear model. So we look at the basic questions of DH that are coming from society, culture, identity, and understanding them through application of research tools, methods, through archiving, visualization. We look at image-based visualization, we look at AR, VRs, and then we take very, very seriously collaborations across all levels, starting from the local to the regional to national to international, and not just amongst subject matter experts and non-subject matter experts, but also between the web and the people. These are some of the disciplinary backgrounds of faculty members who are currently contributing to the Digital Humanities platform here, coming from literature, sociology, film studies, cultural studies, computer science, engineering, and mathematics. So as you can see, it's cross-department, it's cross-disciplinary, and this platform is open to faculty members who believe in this idea of DH and is eager to contribute. So when we actually did a curriculum development workshop last year, and there are 3 things that we did not want to trade off for. And this is 3 significant pillars on which the DH programs currently stand on. First is, of course, like any curriculum on DH, would explore contested definitions of digital humanities, because it's evolving, it's still emerging. The second is considering the importance of DH beyond academic fields. So often, students come to learn about DH and not just to remain within the academia, not just to do a PhD and, be a tenure-track professor. So this academia-industry interface is very, very important for the students to be trained so that they have these translatable skills, they have these transferable skills that they can take with them and make them employable beyond academia. And the third idea that we look at is challenging the inherited separation between humanities and technology. So, questioning the arbitrary boundaries that, that are placed, on disciplines. And so how can these boundaries be challenged, and, how can, the disciplines coexist and in an interdisciplinary manner? So the doctoral degree that we currently have emphasis areas in digital culture, digital heritage, economy, multimodal data analysis, digital epistemologies and methods, and I'm happy to talk about each one later on. And the master's program in DH is really tailor-made in the sense that the 12 core courses, the 18 elective courses that the students credit are all tailor-made in terms of DH through extensive workshops. And also unique for this program is that students come from backgrounds of humanities, social science, and basic sciences. Here you can see some of the disciplinary backgrounds, some of the academic backgrounds that the current batch of MSc DH students at IIT Jodhpur come from, and they come from backgrounds of humanities, social science, mathematics, physics, chemistry, botany. So imagine in a classroom, if you have a student with a background of sociology sitting next to somebody with a background in mathematics, sitting next to somebody with a background in physics. Just imagine the excitement and the challenge that the instructor will have in the classroom to bring them all on the same platform. So this is one of the USPs that the Master MSc DH program has, that this inclusive background of students. So just to give you a sense of the courses that we offer, I've been talking about these courses that we developed. So we have several levels of these courses at the foundation level, at the methodological level, and at the conceptual level. So the foundation level, we have courses such as foundations of DH, archiving databases, IPR, principles of digital economics, data structures, algorithms. Methodologically, we train the students in methods and methodologies in DH, programming techniques, machine learning for DH, social media application development. And conceptually, we offer them some courses such as place identity in the digital age, civilizations, cultures, and technologies, and perspectives in language literary studies. So these are the core courses that the students of DH are expected to credit during their degree program. And the elective courses, as I was also saying, many of these courses, if not all, are actually tailor-made to cater to the requirements of the DH students. So this was not an easy task, I must say, to come up with a whole degree program which is tailor-made, and keeping in mind the big question of what next. So this also brings us to the close of my presentation here, that what sort of direction of future contours of DH pedagogy are we looking at in India? And some talking points to take from here. Number one is to rethink the disciplinary orientations, to rethink the boundaries of disciplines, to reimagine these boundaries, to optimize, resources, to optimize meaningful conversation across disciplines. Second, very, very important, collaboration. So, to me, nothing in DH is possible without collaboration. So whether it's, collaborating with the local archives, local museum, or, collaborating with National Museum, or you collaborate internationally with an organization, be it at any scale, collaborations cannot be undermined in any DH venture. And finally, we need to broaden the academic discourse on DH. We need to talk, move beyond just the discourse of DH research, projects, etc., and talk about pedagogy. We need to talk about, the translational, the transferable skills that students must take with them if they choose not to be in the academia, and how can they make themselves, increase the employability of the students. So with this, I want to conclude my talk today, and I have listed some of the disciplinary natures, cross-disciplinary, multi, inter, trans, and it is really a test of time. It's really time for us to tell us in what direction would DH pedagogy or DH discourse move towards, at least in the Indian context. So thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity to talk about digital humanities on this prestigious occasion, and I welcome your questions and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam, for the insightful inaugural address. I'm happy to introduce today's keynote speaker, Professor Paul Arthur. Sir is a professor of digital humanities, director of the Center for Humanities Research, Edith Cowan University, Perth, Australia. Sir is Vice Chancellor's Professorial Research Fellow and Chair in Digital Humanities and Social Sciences at Edith Cowan University, Western Australia. Since 2017, he has been Director of the Edith Cowan Center for Global Issues, a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society. He has held visiting positions in Europe, Asia Pacific, and North America, and has given keynote and invited talks in more than 20 countries. Paul Arthur was Australia's first professor in digital humanities. He was previously Deputy Director of the ANU Centre for European Studies and the National Centre of Biography at the Australian National University, and was Deputy General Editor, Australian Dictionary of Biography. He has served on the executive boards and councils of the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations, CenterNet, and the Worldwide Network of Digital Humanities Research Centers, the International Autobiography Association, the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities, and the Australasian Consortium of Humanities Research Centers, and the National E-Research Collaboration Tools and Resources, Super Science Initiative of the Australian Government. As Professor Paul Arthur is unable to join us now because of some technical issues, Sir has sent the pre-recorded keynote address. If possible, he will join us in Q&A. I request Sunil Sir to screen the keynote address of Professor Paul Arthur.
It's a real honour and a privilege for me to have the chance to present this address to you today as part of this significant international webinar that is a truly collaborative activity between three countries. It's a credit to the organisers that this has been made possible, and I'm truly grateful to participate. I should explain that I'm pre-recording this because I'm currently in the far north of Western Australia, in a place known in English as Broome. And yet, as is customary in the Australian context, I should acknowledge that I'm on Yarrawu land, the land of the Aboriginal people who are the traditional custodians and owners of this land, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. I'd like to speak to you today about international trends in digital humanities, especially with reference to my experience in Australia and New Zealand, but also to some larger issues in the field. The field of digital humanities has expanded rapidly over the past decade, with new centres, associations and activities proliferating worldwide, including in Australia and in New Zealand. Digital research in the humanities is linking scholars and practitioners across vast regions of the world and has been a connecting mechanism for sharing research results and projects. In Australia, government policies for research funding and infrastructure, including most recently a national research infrastructure roadmap, have acknowledged the importance of digital humanities as a collaborative activity and a framework that connects the arts and the sciences, and it is bringing together researchers and IT experts to create knowledge that couldn't be produced in any other ways. I speak to you as somebody who's been heavily involved with the development of digital humanities in Australasia and was the founding president of our Australasian Association for Digital Humanities. And here you can see in the slide that I'm showing that we set up this association to serve a growing digital research community in Australia, New Zealand, and also more widely in the Asia Pacific region. And I'm really inspired to have learnt about the activities and contributed to some of the earliest presentations of the association being established in India. So here I'd like to discuss a range of digital projects and events that provided a kind of context for the development of the field in Australasia. And this is by way of example, but also to show how distinctive some of these emphases in digital humanities can be in terms of their relation to a particular national or regional context. As in the case of many parts of the world, institutional activities tend to be associated with particular centres or groups and are typically also collaborative, meaning they need to involve more than one person and often different tiers of an institution and potentially a number of institutions. And that's because major projects demand this kind of expertise. And what I'm pointing to here is the launch in 2002 on this slide of the Australian e-Humanities Network and Gateway, which was a key milestone in the development of the field of digital humanities in Australia in particular. And you can see that it's a portal or a list of and links to projects that had been funded through competitive grants that were early exemplars of innovative digital work. Now, interestingly, many of these projects, or most of them I'd say, are no longer available online, and in fact there may no longer be any record of them as they were produced in what we often refer to as the digital dark ages, that time when standards and preservation policies weren't in place. And so these projects in many cases are lost, and yet the memory of them in these sorts of screenshots, such as I took at the time in 2002, gives an indication of the kinds of projects that would have been in many countries but now are no longer accessible. But at the time, this quote accompanied this portal. As digital technologies rapidly transform the practice of humanities research, new arenas of theoretical inquiry engaged with this revolution are also emerging. And I think this is quite important to think about even, and especially now, when the field of digital humanities has expanded so rapidly that it has moved far beyond practical and applied considerations of using software and computing in research, to question, well, what are the politics of that usage? What are the issues of representation? What are the hidden biases? How can we unravel the history of computing to understand what an ethical future for computing could be? And so these fields are as relevant theoretically in terms of an inquiry as well as practically as they were 20 years ago. In Australia, there were many teams, projects and individuals that played a part in the long-term development of digital humanities prior to the establishment of the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities, which in fact came much later. Groundbreaking work in language and textual studies, for example, for which Australia is internationally known, has been undertaken at the Centre for Literary and Linguistic Computing since 1989 at the University of Newcastle, where John Burroughs pioneered early techniques in stylometry, or the statistical analysis of literary stylistics. The Centre's continuing work was led by Hugh Craig from 2001 to 2018. And I'm going to go through quite a number of projects and just give you a sort of snapshot of the important projects that stand out in Australia and its history of digital humanities, to show how varied they are. Later on in the talk, I will also want to speak about how these have been brought together through a new emphasis on data integration and aggregation that points to a future for digital humanities, which is only just beginning. But as it was back 20 years ago or more, many of these projects were standalone activities, including, for example, here, the work of the Archaeological Computing Laboratory at the University of Sydney, developed by Ian Johnson, which included the time map software from 1995, and many other projects built on the Hurist reference database system since 2005, including award-winning projects such as this Digital Harlem, which visualised and explored the spatial dimensions of everyday life in Harlem during its heyday in 1915 to 1930. The Dictionary of Sydney, a project conceived as a born digital web encyclopedia, and that was in 2009, and now one of the more recent projects, Expert Nation, the role of universities, war, and 1920s and 1930s Australia. The University of Sydney also pioneered the scholarly electronic text and image service established in 1996 during the same period. Australia is a large country geographically, and so its universities are spread out. It's roughly 40 universities now spread across a vast country. And so it's perhaps natural that many of these projects grew up and were developed and supported separately in different states of Australia. AusLit, for example, still a current project and a very strong and a project I highly recommend, was started by a consortium of universities led by the University of Queensland, with the aim of housing a range of existing research and bibliographical projects relating to Australia's literary and print culture history, and also building technical and intellectual infrastructure to support further scholarship in the field. This has been under the directorship of Carrie Kilner since 2002, and it's become what is now considered by some to be the world's most comprehensive record of a nation's creative writing across all forms and genres, and critical works associated with this output. Further projects from the turn of the century include this one, AusStage, or the Australia Live Performance Database, started by the Australasian Drama Studies Association in 1999 to address the need for research information in Australian theatre, drama and performance studies. It was basically an index of arts events and a directory of research resources on the performing arts. It's been developed over multiple grants and through other funding over a 20-year period, and now links outward to international connections. The project is currently led at Flinders University in South Australia by Julian Merrick and managed by Jenny Fewster. I also mentioned the Consortium of Research and Information Outreach from the Australian National University, which was closely associated with the acclaimed anthropologist Howard Morphy. This unit had strengths in anthropology, also filmmaking, and it led to the foundation of the current Digital Humanities, or Centre for Digital Humanities Research, rather, which was established in 2010, which is a leading concentration nationally in Australia. Early on, this group, or those associated with it in the first days, produced the South Seas project from 1998 to 2002 with the support of the National Library. And this was an early example of a collaboration between our National Library and collecting institutions and their cultural assets and digitised material, and a university project. In this case, it was tracing cross-cultural encounters and the history of colonial encounters in the Pacific. But this kind of project, although now still available, it doesn't have the kind of richness that many of the projects that have been continued over that 20 or more period now have. And it's, I think it's a fact that we need to recognise in digital humanities, that sustaining large-scale and long-term investment of people, resources and funding into projects is absolutely essential, because in many cases large investments are made and then those projects go offline or they're not properly archived, and so it's that is a difficult situation given all of the investment. But in other cases, you can see that projects such as this one, which I mentioned, the Pacific and Regional Archive for Digital Sources in Endangered Cultures, which is primarily a linguistic project, was begun in 2003, but it has gone from strength to strength over a nearly 20-year period. It started with an original focus on the Asia-Pacific region, but has since expanded to include materials from all over the world. Its ongoing function is to digitise and archive records that relate to cultures and languages that may be under threat. And I know that this kind of project is of particular relevance in India, as it is in many other places that are multilingual, that have multiple official languages, and also a long history of other languages that may be under threat or under-acknowledged. And so I highlight it here. In fact, this archive has been extended so that there are now over 1,100 languages included to date. In 2016, the resource was given a special commendation by the UK's Digital Preservation Awards. And it's a project that has been overseen by Nick Teberger at the University of Melbourne and collaborators over a very long period of time. I turn now to a project, the Australian Dictionary of Biography, that I've had a long association with and worked at for a number of years as the Deputy General Editor during the period of time that this 50-year print work, which produced 18 volumes in print, moved to an online-only format. It's the premier reference resource for the study of the lives of those who were significant in Australian history. And interestingly, in terms of a biographical dictionary, many of the people in the dictionary weren't born in Australia, but they nevertheless made a very significant contribution to Australian life and history and culture. The ADB was launched as a free, accessible online resource in 2006. What's fascinating about this project, if I could highlight it, is that although it's called a dictionary, which you tend to think about as something that's quite familiar and even linear or alphabetical, what this has become is a much more sophisticated virtual research environment in which the data that is contained and structured in the dictionary can be queried and even visualized through network analysis in sophisticated ways. And you can get a hint at that through tabs such as the faceted browse feature. And I encourage you to also explore the related websites and projects of Obituaries Australia, People Australia, Indigenous Australia, Women Australia, and Labour Australia, which are large data sets that contain information about people and biography that have been brought together and linked with, forming a larger database for the Australian Dictionary of Biography so that it can be better representative of Australian people and their history over time. Numerous other projects have been initiated in Australia over the past 20 years, and one of them is this project, the Design and Art Australia Online, which is also a biographical project that draws its content from the original print-published Dictionary of Australian Artists, first published in 1984, but with its origins in the 1970s. But again, this resource, because it's had a custom designed database that is particularly relevant and suited to the kind of material about design and art, and also the individuals who contributed to the history of that field in Australia. This is another project where the website itself has, in fact, over time been renamed to be Design and Art Australia rather than. Libraries have played a major role in digital humanities in worldwide, and Australia is no exception. And although I have signalled that I'd speak about New Zealand, I'm mainly wanting to refer to New Zealand in the context of the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities that spans the two countries. But the Digital New Zealand Library also has a similar service as Trove, which is an advanced search facility that allows members of the public and researchers to search through the word text of digitised newspapers, and you can see here actually how many images have been included in the archive, but also more importantly, how many corrections have been made. If you notice here, 13,504 newspaper text corrections were made in one day. And what this represents and points to is a vast user community. So Trove has set up a crowdsourced platform to correct the optical character recognition of its digitised newspaper program, something that would be impossible to achieve on the scale that it has successfully with in-house staff. It was described when it was first launched in 2010 as a revolutionary new free search engine, but it's become now a full text repository providing access to a vast array of information about Australia and Australians, and also an aggregator of diverse digital content. It's appropriate that I mention a project here, the Midger knowledge-based program, which focused on Indigenous housing. Now, this is a humanities project, but it brings together a multidisciplinary team to ask how can town planning and how can humanities research contribute to understanding the needs of Aboriginal communities. And it was led by Jane Hunter, a professor of e-research and the first vice president of the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities. In Australia, there is quite a close connection between the field that we refer to as e-research, which is sometimes referred to as open science or e-science in other countries, and digital humanities. Here is another very early, established in the 1990s project, which was one of the first, a sort of seminal Aboriginal project, which was a digital archive, which it continues to today, but its innovation was in its first establishment when it set out to try to digitise and gather material from remote Aboriginal communities, but also in a way that respected the traditional laws about access to certain materials that related to men, women, children, deceased people, and other categories. For example, you can see here on this slide, allow open access, a concept that we are familiar with now, but not necessarily 25 years ago. So some of these items could be hidden from view from the public, and indeed many of the items were only ever, and still are, only available to the custodians of those items in the Aboriginal communities that own them. This is just an example of the way that these images have been documented in some of the earliest sort of interface of this database. But again, something that points to some of the uniqueness of digital humanities projects in certain regions, and this is certainly one of those in the Australian context. I want to mention that the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities has had a very long-term interest in developing the digital humanities in Australia. The Australasian Academy is our learned academy for the humanities, and there is also an academy in sciences and other disciplines. But the Humanities Academy has been a particular friend of digital humanities over the last 20 years, including through major commissioned reports such as this one that I'm showing the cover of, the print version of, from at least 12 or 15 years ago now. But during that time, and what I'd like to move to is that the Association for Digital Humanities in Australasia had the major backing of the Academy of the Humanities when it was being formed around 2010 to 2011. And the function of this association, although it was made up of individual members, as most associations of its kind are, was to highlight the individual work, the labour, the initiative, the innovation that had gone on through some of those individual projects that I've just been referring to that were associated with research leaders and research groups that were being brought together increasingly through these discussions at the time over a decade ago now. And I mention this because I think this is a pattern in many parts of the world that I've observed, where individual projects that have been developed in isolation for all sorts of institutional or other communication reasons, policy reasons, because they were linked with key people rather than platforms of established activity or infrastructure. These were able to be brought together in the Australasian context through this Australasian association. And I mention it because I was particularly proud of to be involved with those discussions and be part of the initial meeting that made the agreement that this organisation should be established. The AADH now is part of the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organisations, which no doubt you would know about, or if not, it's worth looking at through this web address to see the diversity of organisations that have become part of what is an umbrella group, a loose network that connects and promotes the work of individual organisations in various countries around the world, as well as across languages and through other groupings. It was because we had become a part of this Alliance of Digital Humanities Organisations in Australasia that it was possible to bid for and successfully host ultimately this first conference that was held of the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organisations outside of the usual rotation between Europe and North America in 2015, which I convened in Sydney at the Western Sydney University. And it took the theme of global digital humanities because at the time this was the moment when it felt, at least for us organising the conference in a new part of the world, in the Southern Hemisphere, that this was a global moment. But of course the momentum now has picked up and many organisations across the world have become partners in the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organisations and demonstrate this truly global trend. And indeed this webinar is evidence that this is the kind of environment, intellectual environment that we're now operating in and which digital humanities as a field can support and foster.
Thank you, sir, for the thought-provoking keynote address. Now, I take this opportunity to introduce today's theme speaker, Professor Claire Warwick, Professor, Digital Humanities, Department of English, Durham University, England. Madam completed her term as Pro Vice Chancellor Research in August 2019. She was previously head of UCL Department of Information Studies and the director of the UCL Center for Digital Humanities, and began her academic career as a lecturer at Sheffield University's High School. Her PhD from Cambridge was in English literature, followed by a postdoctoral position at Oxford University's Humanities Computing Unit and Faculty of English. Her research is concerned with the way that digital resources are used in the humanities and cultural heritage, in the use of social media in these areas, and in reading behavior in physical and digital spaces. She has led and co-investigated several digital humanities research projects. For example, the INK Inc. project and the Q-Rater project. She collaborates widely, especially with researchers in Canada and the USA, and has served on various advisory boards in digital humanities. For example, Digital Manuscripts to Europeana, and was a member of the Committee Scientific Duke Campus Conductor. She also chaired the International Program Committee for the DH 2009 conference. I request Professor Claire Warwick to render words of wisdom. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, I hope everyone can see that well. Thank you very much once more for inviting me to give this talk. It's amazing that there are so many people here who are interested in digital humanities in India. So welcome, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my research, and in particular, the question of how we experience resources in digital humanities and how we navigate the difference and similarity sometimes between physical and digital information environments. So, without more ado, we'll get on to that. So, a lot of the pictures I'm going to show you today are from Durham, which, as you saw in the information on the flyer about the event, is probably the joint third oldest university in England. And so we have some amazing, but we have some very ancient buildings which are part of a World Heritage Site, which is actually part of the university. And so some of the things I'm going to show you are from some of our collections, which is an extraordinary resource that we have in physical form. So this is the big picture you can see here is a 17th century library collected by one of the bishops of Durham, Bishop Cowan. And there are about 3,000 books in there, all dating largely from the 17th and some from the 18th century, which is a remarkable collection. For those days, a huge physical collection. And here's a picture of one of the, well, this is obviously, these are digitized photographs, but this is a digitized photograph of actually one of the service books that the bishop used with his own annotations, which you can see here in his handwriting. So, hitherto, until digital humanities acquired the capacity to work with digital images, as our colleague earlier was showing us in terms of the study of digitization, the only way you would have been able to see these would be in physical form. And you still can indeed visit that library in physical form, although ironically enough, it has some problems with damp and rain, given that the fact that it rains a lot in England. And therefore, the building itself is at the moment closed. So this is the only way you can see the books in digital images. So what happens when we move from that physical to this, which is obviously digitized images? Here you can see some pictures of work that's going on Durham. Here we can see a raster scanner, which is a technique used in chemistry to scan text in a very early English book from around about the 10th century Common Era. And it is basically being used to analyze the pigments in that text, so that we can understand the nature of that book in more complex form. And that's a collaboration between our chemistry department and our history department. And I was intrigued to find out that some of the degree courses that you're talking about in India, you do have such a wide range of subject backgrounds, which I think is really important for digital humanities. This is a picture of the inner workings of our massive supercomputer. Durham has very large high-performance computing resources, which are mostly used by our physicists. But at the moment, we're just developing a new master's course in collaboration with our physicists on data science, specifically in the context of digital humanities. So we are specifically kind of putting digital humanities into the context of very big science, and that's one of the computers we're going to use. And it turns into, eventually, things like this turn into the sort of digitized manuscripts that are relatively familiar, I'm sure, to see. And this is a picture of one of our manuscripts called Hunter 100, which is a medieval manuscript being studied by a group of our colleagues in maths, physics, classics, history, and they're looking at the nature of how the medieval scientists in England understood the nature of light. And so obviously what we've got here is you go from the physical to the digitized surrogate. And I think until relatively recently, we didn't really understand what happened when people interacted with these two very different things, the physical book or the physical library, or the physical art gallery or museum, and the digital surrogates that are being produced as a result of the technologies that we now have. So, I mean, what I'm going to talk about relatively briefly today, in the sense that I could talk about this for a long time, is, and often do, is this is a real problem, I think, for us in digital humanities, and it's something that I'm fascinated with in my research. So, having taken this digital, how is the experience of using a digital resource different from the physicality of, for example, visiting our Oriental Museum? Here you can see a group of people physically looking at items in the cases, many of which are also digitized now, or if indeed visiting our World Heritage Site, which is Durham Cathedral, which is, you know, one of the great buildings in the world. May not compare with some of the beauties of India, but it certainly is a remarkable place to go. So what is it that we're doing, or when we visit these places, when we understand cultural heritage sites, or we visit a museum or a cathedral, and how does that compare with those digitized items, which, you know, some of which, as I say, could equally be in the museum. The library, the books that the images of the books, the library that I showed you a picture of, is right next door to that cathedral. You can't quite see it on this picture, but it's just off to one side. Well, we began to understand a little about this quite a long time ago, in digital terms, of course. When in the early days we did some work, this was when I was at UCL, with colleagues in UCL computer science and psychology, working on human-computer interaction. And we started realizing that people felt very strongly about physical spaces. So you can see how somebody here this is a quote from an academic that we interviewed, talking about the words that I've highlighted in red here are about the way this user feels about using this library. And you can see how many words they use that are very emotive. They carry markers of strong emotion. It's a lovely place. I feel really fond of the library. The greatest pleasure is reading a book. Okay, right, that's interesting. So here is someone talking about their experience of doing research in a library, using physical things like old yellow cards, thumbing through books, talking about how that's actually fun, and they can remember many happy days sitting in the round reading room. That's almost certainly the British Library. Not many libraries have round reading rooms, let's face it. So you can see this is what we began to realize, that people were expressing themselves in very kind of heightened emotive language, usually positive, about the experience of using physical information resources. But this is a while ago now. This is almost 20 years ago. And of course, the technology for using digital information in a network space is very different. In 2002, we could not possibly have imagined having a webinar like this, using sound and video. It would have been unthinkable. So technology's changed hugely. So really what I'm thinking about is, well, so how has it, or has our experience then of using digital resources changed, and do we still think about the same things? One of the things that we can do, obviously, using digital resources is think about how spaces might be imagined differently. So this is the inside of Durham Cathedral, and you can see, I mean, this is another thing, of course, from photographs, whether they're digital or physical, we simply cannot get the same feeling of wonder, of amazement, of what Walter Benjamin, and after him a lot of museologists, call aura, about beautiful heritage objects or beautiful spaces. But that's a picture that gives you just a sense of how big that cathedral is. You can see some people in it, and it's an amazing, beautiful place. And we know that it probably wouldn't have looked like that when it was built. It would have been very highly decorated, and we can see here are some details of a very small part of the cathedral that's been restored. where they have added the colours that they can tell would have been there. Now, oh, sorry about that. I'm just going to go back. Now you can. That's just a tiny corner of the place. You can imagine how extraordinary this whole church would have looked, which is massive, filled with colour. And of course, these colours have now are quite gentle and faded. Can you imagine how that might have looked with reds and blues and golds? And it would have been an overwhelming and extraordinary experience, which one of the ways we cannot go around painting the cathedral red again, but sadly, but we can imagine how it might be in digital form. So this is not the Durham Cathedral, because we haven't actually done this yet. We'd like to, but here's an example of how this is in a Norman castle of a similar age to Durham Cathedral, because Durham Cathedral was built by the Normans after they conquered England. But this is a digital reconstruction of how a Norman castle might have looked inside. So we have a Norman castle next to the cathedral in Durham as well. So this is, you can see somebody here holding an iPad, and as a result, this room is not really decorated like this. It's just bare walls, basically. You can see that fireplace, but it's really bare walls. And this, looking through her iPad, she's able to visualize how it might have looked, which is amazing. And here's another picture. This is maybe what she's seeing. So we can use the AR and VR technologies that we were hearing about earlier on to visualize how that room could have looked in the Norman period. So you can imagine how we could potentially use these digital technologies to put that color back into the cathedral. But is the experience, how is the experience altered? Is the experience the same? Is it different? If we're looking at these, you can see this person is standing in the actual castle and looking at the reconstruction, which is of course digital, not physical. But here we are today looking at this digital image. Now, we can't be in that cathedral or that castle or that heritage space. So what's the role of this digital reconstruction for us, and how do we feel about it? Do we feel, one of the big questions that I'm interested in is, do we feel the same when we see this as we heard those people talking about being in libraries? And by the way, research that I've done and research that one of my former graduate students, Dr. Laura Dietz, has done in this area of digital books suggests that a lot of people feel very strongly about the physicality of books and texts. And a lot of people speak about it in very highly emotional terms. So that what we found turned out to be early, but not at all atypical. So I've been looking at this question for quite a long time. You know, what do we do when we're looking at digital images of physical heritage objects? And this is a different research project that we carried out, which is we looked at, well, could we understand what happens when people look at digital images of physical art objects? We were hoping to go back and compare it actually in gallery and compare people really looking at physical art objects and then looking at the digital reproduction separately, but unfortunately we didn't get funding to do that. So we've only done the first phase of the project. Nevertheless, it was a very interesting experience. These pictures are of a 17th century, there is a series of 17th century paintings taken from the Bible of Joseph and his brothers. So there's 13 paintings, and they are in a physical setting at Auckland Castle, which is another castle in County Durham, which used to belong to the Bishop of Durham. And we were interested to work out how people view these things, and could we affect the way people view art images by altering the information that we give them about them. So we used, in this phase of the project, we were actually using digital images of these art objects. And I don't know what museum practice is in India, but I presume it's similar, that when you go to a museum, you usually see a small label that gives you a few details about the art object or about the museum object that you're seeing in a case. But the details that you're getting about these pictures were very much about who the person was in the Bible, which is not enormously meaningful for the vast majority of visitors now. He may not have a great knowledge of the Bible. So we wondered whether if we gave them slightly different information, more about the aesthetic qualities of the pictures. So for example, we said things like, you can't really see because you can see these are heat maps. So you can see the time where someone looks and how long they look at it. Red means they look at it the longest. So unfortunately, this person's features are obscured by the heat map, and as is the little picture here. That's a lion, by the way. Obviously, nobody had seen a lion in 17th century Spain where these pictures were painted. It doesn't honestly look very much like a lion when you see the real thing. But anyway, here's a man with a lion, and the textiles here are beautiful. And they're pictures of a sort of heavily woven silk garment. So we thought, okay, well, if we produce some new information and we ask people to have a look at, things like the lion and the textiles and things like that, would that change what people looked at? Equally, if we gave them no information at all and we just said, well, here's a picture, do you like it or not? What would happen? Well, what we saw happening was that here's the original information. So most people looked at the man's face with much less going down to his hand and a tiny bit about the lion. When we told people more about the nature of the painting, then people looked at different things. This is with no other information at all. So they just look at his face. They might look at it a little bit more. Obviously, their attention is caught by the lion here because they're wondering what it is. But you can see here, when we gave them more information, we said, have you seen the thing he's holding? And have you seen the nature of his clothes? And have you thought about, oops, sorry about that. Have you thought about what this lion's doing there? People obviously looked less at his face. You can see the spot is smaller and more around about. Okay, great. That was interesting. But here's where we got some really unexpected results. What we talk about is this is the original information. This is the aesthetic context is the new information we gave them, and obviously no context is no information at all. You can see that things changed as in terms of what time people spent looking at the pictures, depending on whether we had context or not. So that was kind of interesting. So the time they spent, the more, when we gave them different information, they actually spent a little bit less time looking at it. And not surprisingly, when we gave them no information at all, they spent a little bit more, but not much. But so much, that turned out not to be that so interesting. What we found was really interesting was these different bars indicate where in the picture they're looking. So are they looking at, this is not labeled, but are they looking at his face? Are they looking at the clothes, other parts of the image that we'd pointed out, or are they just kind of randomly looking at other bits? So here you can see originally people are going to look at the face, and that's normal for art history. It's common that when we go and look at an art object, generally we will look at the face of the person there. That's not surprising. We're primed to look at other people's faces. And it's interesting that when we gave people no information, they equally, if not slightly more, looked at the face. But when we gave them more information about the aesthetic context, the lion, the clothes, the sky, all that kind of thing, what's he holding in his hand, they looked away from the face. So here you can see that they're looking much more at, clothing, lions, what he's got in his hands, considerably less at the face. And that's actually very important and turns into a very interesting finding about what we think and feel about the aesthetics of digital, because this is slightly confusing. We asked people how much they like the painting. Confusingly enough, the scale means that the bigger the blue bar, the less they liked it. So actually it turns out that they liked it best without any information at all. Then they liked the originals, they liked the picture more if they had the original context. They actually didn't like it anywhere near as much when we had told them to look away from faces. In other words, we didn't mean to tell people they shouldn't look at the face, but we drew their attention to other features of the painting, and as a result, they actually liked it less. But what we can tell is that they, in previous terms, they actually did like seeing the painting. Now, that is actually the first evidence that I have ever seen of people feeling any sort of strong emotive connection to a digital reproduction of a heritage object. So actually, this is really important. The fact that they didn't like something turns out to be really important because it implies that people are feeling strongly about at least a digitized version of an art object. What we'd like to do in future, and as I say, unfortunately, we don't have money to do this at the moment, is think, well, yes, but how much less or more did they like it than seeing a physical painting? And we just don't know at that point, but this is just a tiny bit of evidence. However, it gets kind of complicated when you go back to this question about books. So here's some extracts from Laura Dietz's PhD work which she completed in 2018. And you can see that despite the fact that the technology has moved on, people still say these very emotive things about reading physical books or encountering physical books. Look at the words they're using: soothing, wonderfully visceral, love the way the book feels, snuggled up, thrilled, browsing, really excited, all that kind of thing. And before anybody says, oh yes, but these will be old dodderers who aren't up with the new technology. No, not at all. These are young people. These are students and master's students. And in fact, we found that the younger people were, in fact, the more strongly they felt about what they call real books as opposed to digital books. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that although the technology changed, the way people feel, certainly about digital textual objects, has not changed. Although we're beginning to see that there might be a little bit of evidence that people at least have some kind of emotional attachment. How strong it is, we don't know, to a digitized version of an art object. And this is actually very important because it does indicate there are differences between the way that we experience a digital object and a physical object, even if the digital object is an exact reproduction of the physical object. So this, I think, is fascinating. It is not easy to work out why. I mean, we know what now. We know that people are finding things different in terms of their emotional reaction. What we don't know is why they do. And that's going to be, I think, the next phase of my research, because that sense of, well, what's going on here and why do people do this is so far not really understood, but it's fascinating to me. So I think, I tend to find that it's difficult to draw conclusions about my research in digital spaces because so much of it is ongoing. But I think what we can say is that we can change the experience of encountering a cultural heritage object or a humanities object. And we can augment it using digital technologies, which allows users to have a different kind of involvement and engagement. But that even if we use digital reconstruction, the engagement people will have with a digitally reconstructed object or environment is not the same as a physical one. And we have to understand that there is a very significant contribution being made to somebody's enjoyment of a heritage context by visiting a castle or a cathedral or a beautiful place, wherever it may be, by the sense of what that place is doing, the physicality of it, how it interacts with their emotion, the kind of the pleasure it brings them, the awe, the wonder that they experience, and the fact that they're doing that socially, that there are other people around them, which, I mean, I'm really conscious of the lack of social engagement here, that, here we are all physically distributed across the world, and it's wonderful that we can link up like this. But I feel the real lack of physical, social engagement with all of you here, which I'm sure all of us do if we're sitting at home with our computers. So I think that's something that the current difficult situation has made us realize, that digital in no way replaces the physical. The physical is very, very different from digital interaction. What digital can do is augment in really exciting ways and allow us to see things that we possibly could not see in physical terms. I can't go around painting Durham Cathedral red and blue and gold again, but we need to understand how to make those physical and digital environments work with each other and to complement each other, and to stop thinking that one replaces the other. So thank you very much.
Thank you, madam, for your words of expertise.
Thank you.
Now I am delighted to introduce the second theme speaker, Dr. Padmini Murai, founder, Design Beku, Bengaluru, India. Madam has done her PhD from University of Edinburgh and is the founder of Design Beku, a collective that emerged from a desire to explore how technology and design can be decolonial, local, and ethical. Padmini established first degree level digital humanities program in India at the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology, where she was course director from 2016 to 18. She was the recipient of the Arts and Humanities Research Council Unbox Fellowship and the co-investigator with Claire Squares on the book Unbound, also funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. She is currently co-investigator on Gendering the Smart City with Professor Ayona Datta and the digital lead on 2 Centuries of Indian Print, a project in collaboration with the British Library and Jodhpur University. She served as a trustee for Wikimedia UK from 2013 to 14 and led a research project on platform governance and design for the X-Step Foundation in 2018. Now I request Dr. Padmini Madam to enlighten us with her theme. Over to you, Madam.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's really a great joy to be speaking to people in my own city and beyond. It's really lovely to see a number of people from all over India and outside India attending this event. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship of design and the digital humanities. Some of this work kind of stems from my work at the Srishti Institute for Art, Design and Technology, which I think Mayurakshi had mentioned early on. So as we're now seeing, there is a large number of kind of initiatives around digital humanities in India, which is very welcome. But I think the kind of unique context of the fact that we were located in a design school meant that my questions around digital humanities were somewhat kind of approached from, I would say, maybe a different angle. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I feel that the relationship between this design and the digital humanities can maybe nuance our understanding of what the digital humanities is and can be. I think I also want to kind of touch upon the fact that when I'm talking about digital humanities, I'm not actually only talking about it in an academic context. I kind of feel that there is a lot of potential for the digital humanities to move us towards what is called the public humanities, which is where humanities scholarship and humanities research is accessible to a large range of audiences. And I think in a country like India, it seems absolutely imperative that we approach any kind of digital humanities work with that audience also in mind. I think Claire's paper was actually a great preface to this, because what she was talking about was public engagement with digital artifacts through the cultural sector and cultural heritage sector, which is obviously a really great space to kind of explore and experiment with how we think about the digital and how people can engage with the digital. So I kind of also want to kind of draw at this point just your attention to the number of, I guess, aspects of digital humanities that we have to rethink when we kind of I guess, for want of a better word, import digital humanities ideas and research from an Anglo-American context. As Mayurakshi and Paul's paper demonstrated, there's obviously a kind of a history of digital humanities in different regions in the world, kind of that observe different paces of progress and different paces of development. Some of this is to do with institutional factors such as availability of technology, infrastructure, availability of expertise. But I think even, despite kind of the academy in India embracing digital humanities, scholarship and research over the last few years, there are still things that we actually have to really, I guess, kind of rethink from the bottom up. So, and I guess this is, to my mind at least, what we definitely need to look at, which is kind of ontologies, which is just the nature of knowledge itself, and how that is enshrined across languages. So when we talk about, say, for example, a concept is enshrined in a word, and the way that a concept may be thought about through, kind of through its verbal connotation in one language is often very, very different in another. And there are some concepts, for example, that exist in Indian languages that don't exist in English. And this means that our understanding of our knowledge in India is incredibly rich and various. But in order to take seriously something like multilingual computing, the kind of work, say, that Nirmala does, there needs to be a kind of a lot of effort being put into just even understanding what it means to work across languages, to build these infrastructures and these databases that can serve as archival tools, for example. Epistemologies, by epistemologies, I mean just kind of the various knowledge systems with which we work. So the university in India it's definitely a legacy of the colonial movement. The humanities itself was instituted as a response to the Macaulay Minute, which was a colonial impulse to educate Indians, native Indians, so that they could work in the IS and work for the British Empire. So even now, and I think this is definitely changing, but a lot of the kind of syllabi and curriculum that many universities use are kind of very strongly influenced by quite Western, enlightenment-driven notions of knowledge building and knowledge systems. So, again, in a country as multitudinous as India, how do we incorporate knowledge systems from different regions, from different cultures, from different tribes, indigenous spaces? How do we bring those epistemologies together? In terms of praxis, what I basically mean by this is how do we practice digital humanities in India? And in a sense, I think my talk is going to basically talk a little bit about how I see us maybe thinking about digital humanities slightly differently from the West. So I'll leave that for now. Archives are obviously hugely important. I mean, the whole digital humanities project is built on the idea of the archive, and now increasingly of big data. And there's obviously a great need to build, copious archives for material that is rapidly disappearing. So I think, as in Claire's paper, she demonstrated that when you have fragile material, the preservation of that, the best ways to do that is through digital means. And there needs to be a lot of training, a lot of expertise, and a lot of infrastructural development for that to be taken seriously in the Indian Academy. I'm not going to say anything about pedagogy because Mayurakshi's already covered that very well. I think I do want to just kind of briefly say about, when I say histories, what I mean is that our history of what it means to be working in the digital humanities is very different from the way that the digital humanities came into being in the Anglo-American space. It was very much a kind of outgrowth of English literature departments, which really isn't the case here. And as I think Mayurakshi quoted P.P. Sneha, as Sneha has demonstrated, that the way that digital humanities kind of was shaped here was very, very different from the way it was in the West. And technologies, obviously, what is available, what is accessible, what do we have by way of multilingual computing, all of this obviously is going to shape the way that we think about the digital humanities going forward. But what I also want to talk about is the increasing grasp of corporate technologies on our understanding of what technology is. And I think in the digital humanities, what we try to do is to critique both the use of technology and how technology is thought about, conceived, culturally shaped. And I think for that to kind of demonstrate that, I'm going to use the case study of Google. So I will be talking about the role that design plays specifically in this conversation. And the reason why I want to kind of make that relationship explicit is that we all first encounter technology through the interface, right, through the screen. And whatever we see on the screen is a window into the actual kind of mechanisms or the kind of business models of these corporate technologies. So this is a quotation about Google's business model, which is that it's the world's biggest, fastest option, a never-ending automated self-service version of Tokyo's boisterous fish market, and it takes place every time you search. So I think, I don't know how many of you have thought about what happens when you're searching for something. What is the kind of algorithmic roulette that gets us to a search result? It's completely driven by advertising and by Google's profit motive. I think we, increasingly there's a lot of awareness about this. I think, recently we know that for those of you who may have seen the documentary on Netflix, The Social Dilemma, you might be aware that the whole idea of all of these services being free has come at a very big cost to privacy, to citizen privacy, to democracy. And I think the reason why I want to talk about kind of the interface and the complicity of design in these kinds of ways of understanding technology is that it's only possible to push back against these technologies if one understands how these technologies work. So in the case of Google, I mean, this is, the interface is the brand. Google now obviously has a large suite of products that it offers, but its first and it's still arguably its kind of mothership product is the Google search engine. The Google search engine, I mean, it's still actually kind of absurdly simple in kind of how it looks and feels, because it is basically kind of delivering to you kind of what it thinks you're looking for, and it doesn't really have to do much more than that to keep you using the search engine. They've also been in the game much longer than many other search engines, so therefore they are increasingly sophisticated in the way that they deliver and perform. But I do think that it is important to kind of understand why Google is kind of successful as a product. One of the major reasons is that the Google search facility is, and it's been called by an Australian academic called Mitchell Whitelaw. He describes it as a stingy interface. So basically what he says is that the interface of Google, this one search box, is all that you can see kind of behind the curtain, so to speak. And then whenever you are given results in a hierarchical order, which you are very unlikely to challenge. So most of us, we know that when we use Google, we maybe use the first page, maybe the second page, but we don't tend to go further than that. And so therefore, our entire relationship with the digital universe is mediated through what the search engine directs us towards. This is particularly kind of, I think, threatening in a country like India, where we have emergent users, the next billion users, people who are coming online for the first time, who have obviously kind of skipped over or leapfrogged over the laptop phase and have gone straight to mobile. And majority of mobile phone use in India is Android phone use, which means that from the moment that you start using a phone, you are onboarded into the Android universe, which means that almost all of your digital activity is funneled through Google, and Google has quite a stranglehold on your data and the choices that you're making every day, and is very aware of the kind of the relationships between the data that you are generating. So you might be searching for a coffee, a cafe, and then it will show you where that might be on maps. Then it might show you, photographs that were taken there, that you may have taken there with friends earlier, and all of this data is something that Google has, kind of ready access to. So one reason why I feel we've arrived at this place where these kind of social technologies have actually become so dangerous, I think, and so kind of threatening to user privacy is because we have not had conversations about the interface. Because the interface is what creates a frictionless experience for most of us, it's something that we don't tend to question, because that's exactly why digital products are designed the way that they are. They are designed in a way to guarantee addiction. They are designed in a way to guarantee your use to constantly get some kind of reward, like the dopamine kick, as it's called. So, when somebody presses like on a Facebook status, that kind of reward is what keeps us hooked onto these technologies. So this kind of understanding of behavioral design as part of the building of these technological products is something that has not really been kind of delved into enough. There's also the question of what we call systems design. So all of these are part of vast systems which are kind of, and this particular image is from a website called the Anatomy of AI, and basically it is kind of like an exploded view of what happens from the moment, say, a child laborer kind of unearths or mines the mineral that is put into your phone to make it work, to the top echelons of, say somebody like Jeff Bezos, who runs Amazon. The whole infrastructural implications of that supply chain it's a systems design question, right? And it's something, again, that we need to understand if we need to kind of push back and learn how these technologies work, and then kind of think about how we can build our own technologies that might want to challenge these existing corporations. So basically, I'm making two propositions. That search is broken, but it's broken on purpose. It's broken in order to guarantee Google profit. It is broken so that it doesn't really get any more challengers. And these are very kind of financially and economically motivated ideas, and interfaces themselves are broken. So, as I said, the hierarchical search, as opposed to, say, something like a rhizomatic search, which would mean that, if you saw all of your search results in a network, then what would that mean? That would mean that you would be able to see a lot of results all at the same time, which would allow you as the user to have a choice in what you are seeing, rather than what you have right now, which is a very top-down, kind of deterministic kind of way of engaging with the internet. So this is a design problem, which is why I think we need to think about we need to think more about how to intervene in the way that design of technology kind of shapes our experience. I think Claire was talking about user experience in a sense, and I think, given the ubiquity of digital product and digital use, we really need to think about, when we're creating any kind of infrastructure, be that a database, be that an archive, how does a knowledge infrastructure, how is it shaped, and what are the design decisions that are made to make it look in a certain way, make people interact with it in a certain way. So I just came across this quotation today, but I quite like it. Design is only of any interest if it is derived from tensions, polarities, contradictions, in other words, the opposite of a center. And I think the way that I am kind of, I guess, interpreting this statement is that there is, or there shouldn't be, one way of doing things on the internet. There needs to be a multitude of ways of using, designing, encountering technology, encountering knowledge systems, using the internet. And I think that design actually comes into its own when it allows us to kind of play around with different modes by which we can deliver, we can appreciate, we can propagate knowledge. So in the next half of my talk, I'm going to just quickly look at some examples of work that we've done that kind of demonstrates this. So I think something else that is maybe worth kind of bringing into play here is also the relationship between the interface and democracy itself. I'm sure most of you are aware that governance in this country and in many countries all over the world is now increasingly delivered through a digital interface. It is delivered through your phone. You have things like Aadhaar, which is a biometric kind of a database, kind of is basically makes you part of a database. And so the interface again becomes very, very important in how we kind of encounter our relationship with democracy, our relationship with these kind of governance technologies. So this is an article that myself and Paul Anthony George, who works with me at Design Beku, wrote a few months ago, and it's about the data protection bill. And some of you might be aware of the implications of the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is obviously kind of a landmark bill in terms of the way that it thinks about citizen rights, as well as in terms of user privacy. It's definitely one of the first kind of legislations in India to at least take that into account. However, there have been many critiques as to why, as to what this bill claims to be doing in terms of its delivery of user privacy, of how these rights that are enshrined in the data privacy bill, how these rights will manifest themselves through, say, an interface is still not clear, and nor has it been described by the government. So it's all basically, to kind of put this in simpler terms, it's all very well for the government to say that you will be able to have these kinds of rights to privacy under this bill, but the delivery of those rights through an interface that might guarantee those rights is not something that the government has bothered to stipulate. So these kind of critiques are something that we as digital humanists should definitely be doing. It's definitely kind of, or should be part of our kind of, I guess, toolkit to kind of understand how we as citizens, or kind of, I guess, yeah, as citizens, how we encounter governance technologies and how we can possibly intervene. So something that Paul did to make this, slightly more kind of easy to understand, because obviously, like all legislation, the data protection bill is a complicated document. We put this kind of comic together, which basically it's a speculative comic about a 8-year-old child. And it's seen through the eyes of that child and their father's relationship with his phone. And basically what kind of unfolds through this, he has a munda that makes him invisible. And basically, it's a metaphor for the fact that if you are not part of a database, if you are not part of, the Aadhaar database, for example, you become invisible. And all of you, I'm sure, when you've used technology, have encountered the end user license agreement, which is called the EULA, which is, basically you say, yes, I consent to this, to using this piece of technology, or I don't. But the kind of the irony of it, of course, is that this is not informed consent in many, many cases. So if you think about the next billion users coming online, I would guarantee around 95% of those people have no clue what they're signing on to in terms of their rights. So this is a kind of, I guess, slightly, it's a poignant kind of view of what happens when you don't understand, but the system is forcing you to be part of that conversation. And if you can't understand what is happening to you, it can have quite dire consequences. And we've obviously seen this in terms of, say, welfare delivery via Aadhaar, that if your name is not part of that database, then you become invisible to the system. And so the reason why that's particularly important when we talk about the data protection bill is that all of this content now, or all of this information now about our citizenry is part of a database, and therefore it's, at least I feel, it's imperative that we, at least as digital humanists, take the responsibility to understand the way these technologies and the way these legislations affect us, so that we can teach other people as to what it means for their lives. Just a very quick example of what I meant about different kinds of interfaces. This is a website that we built for an academic partner called Maya Indira Ganesh. She works in AI, and so this is a dictionary of AI that she put together. So the content is not ours, but what we did do while working with her was to kind of experiment and play around with different kinds of ways of designing a search engine. Or search results. So, for example, this is a kind of an example of what I was saying a little earlier about like a networked kind of a view, an exploded view of search results, which means that you don't have to hierarchize, or you don't have to follow the hierarchy that is given to you by a search engine that you're looking at. There's also another version of this that we did, which is a kind of as I said, it's a kind of rhizomatic network view where you can basically, the relationship of each content, each piece of content to each other is what ensures its proximity. But again, there is no imposed order on the user. As a user, you can just kind of click on one node, which will then will take you to kind of similar nodes and kind of articles and so on and so forth. So it's a search engine, but a kind of a graphically kind of designed search engine. So I just want to conclude with a project that we did, which was another way that we were trying to push back on what I guess we call proprietary technologies. Again, I'm sure many of you are aware that the way that we think about, so this is the relational view I was talking about, the kind of the exploded search results that are connected to each other, so this is what I meant about kind of search engine kind of that allows you to kind of choose, and you as a user have more kind of flexibility in kind of seeing what you see. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was a project called Gendering the Smart City, which is a project that we did in conjunction with some young women in Delhi. They live in Madanpur Khadar, which is a resettlement area. And as a consequence, they are fairly marginalized. And the project basically kind of deals with how technology helps them in their mobility around the city. And not only how it helps, how it hampers. There are all kinds of dangers, I guess, within quotes, around young women using technology. And so in this project, we kind of explored different ways in which these young women were kind of encountering the city through their phones. So one part of this exercise was to create a Wikipedia article with them. The reason why we wanted to do this was because the way that their neighborhood looks through the lens of, say, something like Google Maps is it's a very kind of non-detailed, very kind of blank canvas, because nobody is really interested in their area as a place of commerce or as a place of kind of importance, because it's a fairly poor community. And so we thought about how can we put, say, Madanpur Khadar, how can we put their neighborhood on the map? And one way that we chose to do this was through making a Wikipedia article with them. So now the interesting thing about this kind of project was that, first of all, they were not so familiar with Wikipedia itself. So we did kind of introduce them to the notion of Wikipedia. Can you all see this slide now? Yeah, great. So, and we also, I guess it was what we would call an analog editathon. So if any of you have ever contributed to Wikipedia, you might know that, those events are called editathons, when you create an article and put it up on Wikipedia. But because of, I think also kind of language issues, so we wrote this article both in Hindi, so it's on the Hindi Wikipedia as well as the English Wikipedia. But we did a kind of analog version where we kind of asked them for kind of all the information that they had about their neighborhood. Now, all of these young women have grown up in that neighborhood, and they have a wealth of information about their spaces, which is very, very difficult for an outsider to have. And so we kind of used this to kind of build an incredibly kind of informative Wikipedia article that was about their neighborhood. However, what was interesting is that Wikipedia, because of its own limitations, which basically does not allow oral citations. So basically, if you cite something and it is footnoted, it must only cite a published piece of work. It can't be something that somebody has said, which has very profound implications for in a country like India, because most of our knowledge is enshrined through orality, not in printed books. So we really had to kind of, manipulate it slightly so that we did manage to get the page approved. And the way that we did this was because my co-author, my co-investigator, Iona, had written some academic articles about this area. And those were the citations that we used to kind of support and then eventually publish this article. So what I kind of would say were the values that were at the heart of this project were kind of handing over the building of an archive to the people who are the most affected by it, or the community is the first audience of that archive. So I'll just end by saying that I think when we're talking about the digital humanities in India, I think because of the, I guess for want of a better word, because of the kind of profoundly hierarchical way that knowledge works in this country, it's incredibly important that we ensure that the way that we treat our cultural heritage, the way that we treat information about our communities is very, very nuanced. And so therefore there's a difference between curatorship, custodianship, and stewardship. So who owns the archive, who contributes to the archive, who decides, who the audience for that archive is. Is it fair for all communities to have information about them made public to the world when it might harm them? So I think the stakes, in a sense, are quite high in the way that we use the digital for knowledge. And I think that if we look both at the kind of impact that design has on the digital, as well as kind of the way that we create knowledge, that should be kind of constructive in the way that we think about the digital humanities going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam, for the wonderful theme address. Now the floor is open for the interaction. As we are running out of time, we take up only few questions which we have received in the chat box. I request Sunil sir to moderate the interaction session.
The first question to Dr. Mayurakshi, ma'am. Ma'am, can I go through with the question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, ma'am. The first question is the impact of digitalization on teacher is a boon or bane?
I really don't have an answer to that, but I would leave the floor open for that. The impact of digitization on teachers, is it? Is that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I mean, what sort of impact are we talking about here?
It is the positive side that how much it is going to help for the teachers in the coming days to reach students, because the students or the kids nowadays, they're too much into electronic gadgets and digitalization, towards the digitalization, so that even as a teachers we have to take a same path which will help students to connect very quickly. If we still go through with a traditional method, it may bring a lot of gap between me in the sense as a teacher and the students. So in that context, how it's going to impact on the teachers, that's what our audience or the participants want to know.
I think I really don't have a definite answer for that, because this would be evolving over time, and it crosses path with a lot of things that we have been talking about today. The impact of experiencing the digital. As an instructor, if you ask me if I like teaching online classes or if I like teaching face-to-face classes, my answer is the second option for sure. I do not enjoy teaching online classes. But we come across with, situations where you don't have any other option. So you evolve. And you find innovative ways to, accustom yourself with the change. And I think this impact on instructors is only going to be for the better, provided, as Padmini was also mentioning, that we have access. So the question of access becomes very important here. So I think that's but I'm interested to hear from the others also on this.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Could I say something? I'm not sure if you can hear me here. It's Paul Arthur. I'm enjoying the conversation and these questions.
Thank you, sir. We are audible. You are audible.
You are audible, sir.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that during the last 6 months or so, there's been such a huge change in teaching pedagogy and the way that online courses have been delivered in many parts of the world. And we're all just sort of struggling to keep, catch up with this new requirement to deliver online learning. But in many parts of the world, this has been going on for some time. And so many countries have been better prepared than others. But I think digital humanities has become, so vitally important, because it's not just to do with new methods, but it's to do with communication, accessibility, new
teaching paradigms. And so it's a very vibrant field for that reason.
Sir, and the next question to as the speakers throughout the webinar explained that in a few countries it is still taking its we are exploring this particular topic in a few countries, and in a few countries it is there from past only few years. Can you please put a light on the opportunities and the challenges what we may face in the coming days to make this particular topic to reach a maximum people?
Oh, that's really challenging because obviously, as Padmini was saying, DH in India is going to have a different trajectory, I'm sure, because it has a different origin from that in the kind of Anglo-American context. But I think quite bizarrely, perhaps it links to the previous question in the sense that we've, as Paul said, we've all suddenly had to be introduced rather roughly to learning and teaching and being online in all sorts of different ways. And we've all realized that actually in many ways we don't like it. So I think some of the challenges are going to be about thinking about the sort of the issues that Padmini was discussing in the context of how does the digital fit into society? How does it relate to what we're doing? And the fact that it is possible that the students, just as we found that the younger students or the younger people in our survey loved physical things much more than digital things, we may find that as a result of the confinement and the lockdown that we've had to go through as coronavirus, people may start to think, well, I'm not actually that fond of this digital stuff. I maybe want to do something completely different. So I hope not, but I think we keep thinking in digital humanities, right, that's great. Now the whole world's going to want to do our subject. I fear there might be a little bit of a backlash in this. And so I think we do have to keep advocating for why the subject's important and why, and not assuming that just because people are, in their late teens or 20s, they might feel completely comfortable in digital environments and they might be able to critique them in the way that we've been looking at them today. Naturally, I don't think that follows. So I think probably with the coming generation of students who are coming to us from school, we do still need to think about some of the kind of quite basic questions about the nature of digital things and advocating for why digital humanities is important.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And the next question to Dr. Padmini, ma'am. Can I go through with the question, ma'am? Would going digital in humanities help the stakeholders better than classroom teaching?
So I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, I do think that there is a lot of kind of teaching within quotes that can happen with around the digital outside the classroom, right? So for example, we work very closely with somebody called TB Dinesh, who he builds very kind of low tech equipment that can be used by people in kind of remote communities to archive their own cultural traditions. So he builds these very kind of simple devices that can be used to build their archives. And so that in a sense is also a kind of a learning and a teaching about the digital, but very very remote from a classroom situation. So I do think that there is a lot of potential for the digital to be used in ways that, that allow people to take, I think, ownership of their own heritage and cultural properties. So I think in that sense, yes, I think there's definitely a potential. And also just because most people, or increasingly more people have phones, so it also democratizes the space a lot, which means people can take video and images and kind of write and publish much easily than they could before.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And the last question to Paul Arthur, sir. So can I go through with the question? Yeah, sure. And the question is digital era reduces the study methods in a coming year, and is a digital era is going to take over the traditional method in coming years? So that's what the participant want to know.
Claire, yeah.
I could, I mean, I'm sure, offer some insight into this, but I'm sure other people will have particular insights into the situation in India. But certainly, you know, this is a question that people have been grappling with for almost as long as I've been doing digital humanities, which is actually quite a long time now. I think there's always going to be, some people obviously wonder whether all humanities will become digital humanities. Just because digital is having a greater and greater role in our everyday life. I don't think it will, precisely because of some of the things I was talking about. You know, people still do have a very strong emotional, intellectual relationship with physical art objects and areas, places such as heritage sites, museums, etc., etc. I think people are always going to want to study those physical things. Because it's not that they're better or worse than digital things, but they're just a different experience. And I think it's actually quite important that in digital humanities we acknowledge that, and we don't make out that we think we're going to take over the world. Because I think that some of our colleagues in the more traditional academic disciplines, not only in arts and humanities, but potentially also in social sciences and maybe even science, may sometimes feel threatened if we kind of come charging in and say, well, what you do is terribly old-fashioned, we're going to change the world. Because I think there is a place for traditional humanities scholarship, just as there is for exciting new digital scholarship, and potentially for things that mix the two, such as the project I was discussing that had input from mathematicians, Latin scholars, physicists, librarians, special collections people, and using digital materials as well as physical manuscripts. So I think I would say it's probably going to be a hybrid environment for at least the next little while.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. This is from the Q&A session. Over to you, sir.
I thank all the speakers for answering the questions of the participants. Thank you, Sunil sir. A small announcement before the presidential remarks. We send the feedback form link now in the chat box as well as to your registered mail, which will be active for next 48 hours. Kindly fill the same and send back for e-certificate. The e-certificate will reach you from 7 to 10 days. Very shortly, we'll meet in one more international webinar of our evening degree college, that is on 19th this month. The topic is Anti-Caste Politics and Environmental Justice, Chapter 2. In association with Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center, American University, Washington, D.C., USA, and Ashoka University, Haryana, India. It is my proud privilege to introduce one more distinguished guest who is presiding this webinar, Dr. Nirmala Menon, Associate Professor of Literature, Digital Humanities, and Publishing Studies Research Group, Indian Institute of Technology, Indore, India. Madam leads the Digital Humanities and Publishing Research Group at the IIT, Indore, India. She is an Associate Professor in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Discipline of English, IIT, Indore. She is the author of Migrant Identities of Creole Cosmopolitans, Transcultural Narratives of Contemporary Post-Coloniality and Remapping the Post-Colonial Canon, Remap, Reimagine, Retranslate. She has published in numerous international journals and speaks, writes, and publishes about post-colonial studies, digital humanities, and scholarly publishing. She directs PhD students in their projects and runs DH projects from the research lab at IIT Indore. Her primary area of research is post-colonial literature and theory. She is also on the advisory board of the Open Library of Humanities and chair CLCS, Global South Forum, Modern Language Association, editor, Post-Colonial Indian Literature at literacy.com, the Literacy Encyclopedia. She has published in well-known international journals and books and is currently working on her third book titled Decolonializing Knowledge Structures, Digital Humanities in India. I request Madam to render the presidential remarks. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you, Dr. Konur. Good evening to everyone. And first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Konur, Professor Satish, and everyone at SEDC for organizing this absolutely wonderful 1.5 to 2 hours. It's been such a pleasure to listen to all these speakers. And I think my presidential remarks are going to be really short. And I'm just looking at all the presentations that we have had. And before I go through some of the small points I made, I just wanted to say that, there seems to be a lot of anxiety from the questions that were coming about, this kind of move towards the digital space for pedagogy. And I think that anxiety is being kind of, augmented in this last 6 months, where all of us, I think, have been forced to work in ways sometimes that are unfamiliar. But even if they're familiar, you kind of, recognize the challenges of, taking a class online, speaking to an empty class while your students are sitting somewhere else in some of our cases, and the challenges that come with that, and the kind of compromises that we make. So to answer that last question that Claire also tried to address, I don't think you can really replace classroom teaching. I think you can only complement it with, say, some digital resources or, digital talks, but having that face-to-face contact with your students and, working through is always going to be crucial. And I'm kind of, I'm just, all these talks were so wonderful. I think, we could just go on and on. But, we're starting off with Mayurakshi's presentation about pedagogy. And I'm thinking that, as you go through your first batch of students who are doing the MSc plus PhD, I think and I have interacted at least once with them, so I do have a sense of the diversity of that classroom, and this again goes back to that importance of having that interaction physically too, right? Where every student comes to a particular question from very different perspectives, and how to channel those different perspectives into something productive is really going to be the challenge of the instructor. So in some ways, digital humanities is not is only kind of anchoring interdisciplinary research, in a larger sense of liberal arts, I think. So if you look at the classical definition of liberal arts, you're looking at literators and historians and linguists and statisticians and physicists working together. So I do think that there should. So I think we should ensure that the traditional humanists don't have that anxiety or any discipline. But I also think that our mandate as humanities scholars doesn't necessarily change in the digital, in digital humanities, right? And both Claire and Paul gave us this landscape of projects and how to kind of Paul gave us a landscape of Australasia projects across Australia and New Zealand that gives us a sense of how for digital humanities it really doesn't matter that the object that you are examining is something from contemporary culture or maybe a fossil from an ancient time, a manuscript from a different era. The idea is, these have always been our resources as researchers, and to how to harness the digital to understand those resources, clarify them better in some ways, for us. And I think Claire's presentation also led us through doing that hands-on, in a very particular project. And I was specifically interested in the eye tracking part of your presentation, Claire, which I thought was just, amazing. It also reminded me that I think it is not unsurprising that when you're actually pointed to some of the nuances of a sculpture, they like it less, because has that not happened to a lot of us while reading literature over the years, right? Reading literature for pleasure versus reading literature as a scholar, often kills the fun in doing it. So I think, I guess that's kind of our mandate, to be the spoilsport and point people to things that they would not otherwise see. So that I thought that was a wonderful presentation. Padmini, I don't know what to say about your presentation. I was just, it was just so amazing, because I'm currently dealing with infrastructures and the kind of colonizing nature of infrastructures, and you really kind of led us through how crucial that is, and to put a pause on this exuberance about digitalization that we do tend to see, right? And understand, how manipulative they can be. And I was especially interested in that rhizomatics design that you showed, as I would really love to kind of, explore it further, because I think, oftentimes, when we talk about colonialism and we talk about these colonizing structures, you always know that homogeneity and linearity is always the objective, right? And because that is always easier to manipulate, easier to control, right? And I think the very fact that a design gives you something in a rhizomatic manner makes it a little bit more difficult to control. However, it also kind of tests the viewer, right? And they would rather like it in a certain format. So how do we kind of find a balance between the two? But thank you for that, for that amazing introduction. And I think, I was looking at, all of you talked about that intersection between analog and digital. And as I was listening to all of you, and I will end with this, I pulled up an article that, we had written recently for the Debates in DH series. And I think my co-author, Dibyaditi Roy, might be somewhere in this. I think he was there in the beginning. And also, this kind of colonial nature of our education system, which I think Padmini also touched on, forces us or compels us to look at DH in India as necessarily rhizomatic. It cannot be a kind of linear trajectory. And I think, Matthew Krishenbaum's article about, what is DH and what is it doing in the English departments is really something that we realize is not true within the Indian context. It does not reside or even emerge necessarily from these traditional departments. So what might be the reasons for that is something I think we all need to think about. And before I go to two small paragraphs that I'd written to finish at the end, I want all our participants to realize, I think, one which Padmini touched on in her presentation is the regional turn in digital humanities in India. And that regional turn does mean multilingual. That, digital humanities in India cannot be monolingual. It has to be kind of cacophonic and chaotic. And what will emerge out of that will only be, just like Paul showed us this landscape of projects from Australasia. Maybe, sometime down the years, we look at a landscape of projects and then see how those projects converse with each other. And maybe, we will have a sense of the DH landscape, so quote unquote, in India. What we have now are a set of projects that have, as PP Sneha has pointed out in her article, but I think in terms of articulating a theoretical discourse on DH, we should wait. We should not rush into it. We should not hurry to it. That's really my, my sense. And trying to, I'm now just going to read out a paragraph from our article as well as, what I want to end with, that trying to essentialize DH in India or South Asia may be tone deaf and anachronistic, because the decision to make or build a technological tool for DH often rests on the resources available in a particular institution or in the scope for harnessing interinstitutional collaborations. Thus, the act of claiming or accessing these resources for self-identified DH scholars often involves theoretical justifications of these projects provided to institutional authorities through a model of what we call tactical talking. Since humanities scholars are often most understood to be based in discursive rather than technological epistemes in post-colonial spaces, making and talking may not be at the opposite ends for DH in India. In fact, our research shows that most collaborative projects may self-identify as DH emerge from a synergy between both. And in his essay, The Computational Turn, Thinking About the Digital Humanities, Berry points out that, quote, computational technology has become the very condition and possibility required in order to think about many of the questions raised in the humanities today. Berry quotes Hofstadter's differentiation between intellect and intelligence and calls for a digital intellect as opposed to a digital intelligence. This, I think, is particularly relevant to us in India. This underlines a very important shift from computational humanities to digital humanities. And, other scholars like Kathleen Fitzpatrick have also extended that argument for DH to be critical, conceptual, and cognitive. So what we have tried to make in this particular argument is that the ontological exploration of DH paradigms in India has only begun. What these some of the case studies that we discuss demonstrate is that in the process of building and tooling each of these projects in different languages across this country, whether they are from academia, outside of academia, from different organizations, you develop an individual intellect that emerges from the intelligent task at hand. And rather than rush to either work in borrowed theoretical metaphors that may or may not work for the larger body of DH work across the post-colonial space, that is India, or even rush to pitch tents or markers, with still evolving ontology, digital pedagogy, and training in India should simply let diverse projects develop their narrative intellects. And perhaps these varied intellects will in time give us a theoretical and conceptual vocabulary that is organic and will invest the pedagogy in coming decade with much needed clarity and connection. So, many of us here, Padmini, Dibyaduti, myself, Mayurakshi, are all part of this DH Alliance in India and DH Collective in India. And we envisage it as a big tent research area that fosters a conversation between all of these interests, whether it is AI, AR and VR, as Claire's project was talking about, and interface, infrastructures, pedagogy. So digital humanities in India is in the making, the mapping, doing, theorizing, and many more. And unlike DH in Europe or North America, as I just, to answer one of the questions there, DH is always functioning at the intersection of the digital and the analog. And while DH in India can and should be many things, it should not be a checklist, a test, or yet another way to exclude people that major structural forces already exclude. And I think all of the papers in some way or the other touched upon that, importance of access, exclusivity, and being wary of that, being wary and skeptical of the possibility of those exclusions. And I think that to me is really what brought all of the papers together, as well as, a wonderful kind of, conversation. So thank you all very, very much. And that's it from me today.
Thank you, Madam, for rendering the presidential remarks. Once again, thank you each and everyone. Now we conclude the webinar.